It takes more than one person to assist in a personal injury claim. I am attorney Glenn Westmoreland, and we have a strong team at the Mack Law Firm. It is our goal to make sure your injury is properly attended to. Contact me at tangylawteam.com and let us get you the help you need.
Ask Ms. Jenkins, please call the roll.
Ms. Richards? She's outside. Mr. Toller?
Here.
Ms. Abrams? Here. Mr. Westmoreland?
Present.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Mr. Bush?
Here.
Mr. Moore?
Here.
Ms. Simmons?
Here.
Ms. Dominguez?
Present.
All right, our first item on the agenda is to consider approval of a new policy, number GAMEA, related to alcohol and drug abuse and testing for general employees. Mr. Jinko was going to present this policy.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Good evening, everyone. We're going to ask that policy GAMEA and GAMEB be pulled at this time. Council was discussing some issues with the union attorney, and there has been some discussion back and forth and some, I don't know what the right word is, some discussion related to our version of a law or of a recent case compared to Mr. Larry Samuel's version of a recent case. And I'll let Ms. Ashley Bass give you a little more detail.
That's all right. We're going to pull it. So we don't need to talk about it unless you really want to.
I'll make a motion, we pull it.
Well, I'm just going to pull it on your record.
It's going to be, you're going to table it till later?
Yes, we're going to table it till later after Ms. Bass and Mr. Samuel work out the specifics of the case that they're disputing.
Okay. Thank you.
Those will be pulled from the agenda on administration's recommendation. So that'll move us to agenda item C, which is to consider approval to adopt policy IFBGA related to student computer and internet use. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you again, Mr. Duncan. A review by our technology department has added just that first sentence, any district technologies and/or network resources, including computers, the internet, or email services, to specifically talk about student usage for computer and internet use.
All right, is there a motion to approve the administration's recommendation?
But just to clarify, this is I'll make a motion.
Motion is made by
I'll second.
Mrs. Dominguez, seconded
This is a
by
new
Mrs.
policy.
Bailey Simmons. Ms. Dominguez.
All this is a new policy, though, not just that one line, right?
Right,
Yeah.
the one line was added by our technology department, correct.
Any other questions? Is there any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously with Ms. Richards not being present.
All right, next item on the agenda is agenda item 1D, to consider approval of a new policy LH related to educational accreditation agencies relations. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. This is a new policy stating that we want all of our schools to be members of the Southern Association, and when they have accreditation visits, that the administration does everything they need to do to meet the goals so that the committee can do their accreditation visit.
So moved.
Motion is made by Mr. Toller.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Is there any questions from the board? Is there any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the questions. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next set of items is to consider 4 recommendations to delete existing policies that are being combined with other policies. Those are policy IDBC, IFAA, IFCDA, and KD. So I'll take a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation to delete those 4.
I'll make that motion to delete.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons.
No, we did it.
Is there a second?
We did.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Toller. Any board members have any questions related to the deletion of any of these 4 policies?
I agree we should delete as many as we put in every meeting.
Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Do you have that? She has it ready already?
Yes.
Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is closed. Excuse me. Motion passes unanimously.
All right, next item is agenda item 3A, which is to consider revisions to GAMD related to drug-free workplace. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Again, we ask that this one be pulled for the same reasons as A and B, just to have a review of our counsel with Mr. Larry Samuel.
All right, that agenda item is pulled on the administration's recommendation. We'll move on to agenda item 3B, which is to consider approval of revisions to policy IDB related to health education. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. We have information here. We'd like to add a second paragraph. As you read the first paragraph, it comes to a very abrupt ending, and it's really one sentence there about the male self-examination. So we'd like to add a second paragraph that says the Tangipahoa Parish School Board, in accordance with statutory requirements, shall require all male students in grades 7 through 12, except those whose religious beliefs conflict herewithin, to be given instruction in the proper procedure for testicular self-exam on a voluntary basis.
Thank you, Mr. Jinko. I'll make that motion.
So this is a motion to amend the administration's prior recommendation to, if you'll pull that up, go up a little bit, Ms. Jenkins.
I'm sorry.
The last sentence of the first paragraph would be moved to a new second paragraph that would read the way that Mr. Mr. Jinko, is that what you're saying, Mr. Jinko?
Yes, sir.
And will you read that new paragraph? So we're striking the last sentence on the first paragraph and adding a new paragraph,
Correct.
which we'll read again as follows.
Yes, sir. Just for more detail, it would say the Tangipahoa Parish School Board, in accordance with statutory requirements, shall require all male students in grades 7 through 12, except those whose religious beliefs conflict with herewithin, to be given instruction in the proper procedure for testicular self-exam.
All right, and so Ms. Dominguez makes the motion for that amendment. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Is there any objection to the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is agreed to. We'll now move to the administration's recommendation as amended. Are there any questions from the board on the remainder of the administration's recommendation as to this revised policy? Is there any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question on the amended recommendation. Ask members to vote your machines.
Mr. Jink, I have a question on it.
Okay.
Are most kids taking health in high school, or are we doing it in 7th and 8th grade? And is health still a half credit?
Yes,
For
sir.
you to graduate?
Yes, sir, half credit, and trying to get more of it in the 7th and 8th grade.
Thank you.
I'll
I'm
make a
sorry,
motion to
Mr.
accept.
Duncan, did somebody make the motion to approve?
Thank you, I apologize. Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation as amended?
Make the motion to adopt.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons.
I'll second.
I think I heard Mr. Bush first. Seconded by Mr. Bush. Again, any questions on the motion? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Mr. Jenkins. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item is agenda item 3C, which is to consider approval of proposed revisions to policy IDBC related to child assault awareness. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. It is a title change to child assault / abuse awareness, and gives an example of where those types of curriculum can take place in the health and physical education classrooms.
Move to adopt.
Motion is made by Mr. Westmoreland. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Toller. I think this also addresses a question that we had at a prior
Correct. Yes, sir.
committee meeting where we wanted to make sure that there was some policy that dealt with this particular issue. So it's good to see that we do have this policy in place and even some example curriculum that our educators can be referred to.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions from the board on the motion? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is to consider proposed revisions to policy IDDF related to education of students with disabilities. I believe this is just changing. Go ahead, Mr. Jenkins.
No, sir, you're correct. It's just changing the title, striking out disabilities and adding exceptionalities in its place.
Is a motion to adopt.
I'll make a motion to adopt.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons, seconded by Mr. Westmoreland. Any questions from the board? Any public input?
Can I ask how y'all came up with this word? What, I'm
This-
just saying it because we call it special needs in TARC, but,
Forethought.
Okay.
Legislative action from the state.
okay.
Any other questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open.
I believe we had actually changed it throughout the policy at some previous meeting. We just
Yes,
didn't change the
didn't change
title.
the title.
Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item is 3E regarding proposed revisions to policy IDDF-P, seclusion and restraint guidelines and procedures for all students. Again, this is a minor policy change. Mr. Jinko.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Duncan. It adds the revised statutes, and then on page 2, it changes inappropriate to appropriate, just a wording change and adding the statutes that it covers.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
Move to adopt.
Motion made by Mr. Westmoreland, seconded by Mrs. Richards. Any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open.
You want this one?
Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Moving on to the portion of our agenda where we get to beat up on Dr. Hurst, we will take agenda item 3F related to proposed revisions to IDEP, procedures for selecting cheerleaders, dancers, flag corps, and pep squads. Dr. Hurst.
Good evening, Board. Unfortunately, on this one, you won't get a chance. I asked that the Board pull this one.
Nope.
for
We know we're voting on it.
future conversations.
Let's wait, advertise it, get more parents here.
All right,
Just want to pull this.
all right, we'll pull agenda item 3F. Thank you, Dr. Hurst.
Okay,
Move on.
like,
We're tabling that one, right? Dr. Hurst, are we pulling that one from the request? We're just tabling, right?
We're pulling it from the agenda, though, procedurally, and you're going to bring that back to us at a later date, Dr. Hurst?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. All right, next item is 3G, which is to consider proposed revisions to policy IDFA related to interscholastic athletics. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, sir. It's mostly some formatting changes, and it does reference a statute that says that we're not going to limit students, or we will not limit students in the number of activities that they can participate in.
Move to adopt.
Motion is made by Mr. Westmoreland.
Second.
To adopt, seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Mr. Jinko, in the notes, it does also, though,
the homeschool.
remove our prior, we had at one point offered our athletic programs to parents who lived in the district but did homeschooling. And so this is going to be terminating that offer? Is what y'all are recommending?
I think the offer is that it is up to the individual principal at the school. So I think that's took it out to where we were automatically saying no, now leaving it up to the individual principal.
Wait, I don't know if that's a great idea. I'm not sure that that's what it, if we're going to allow homeschool students, you're talking about, or to participate in one school, then they need to be participating at the other school. We can't say you can do it or you can't do it. We need to have our own policy across the board. So why are we pulling this out then?
Dr. Hurst mentioned there were some issues with virtual, with a student that was full virtual. So I think we had to pull for the full virtual students to be able to compete at their home school.
Well, where are you saying it's adding that the principal has a discretion of doing whatever?
No, ma'am, but that's not being added. I'm saying that if we took out the specific language related to homeschool students being participating, so that in the absence of that, then it would have to be left up to the individual principals.
Okay, gotcha.
So have we in the past, I remember
I'm not
this has
aware
been
of any-
shifting over the years where we had a policy, but then we didn't do it for various reasons. But I mean, have we had homeschool students that
I'm
have
not
been?
aware of any homeschool students that have been gained or have approval to participate in any of our LHSAA sports.
So this is really one of those instances where we had a policy that we weren't following, and we're just trying to actually now have a policy that reflects what we've actually been doing.
I'm not sure if we've ever had a policy that says homeschool students could not participate or could participate.
Well, but that's what we're striking here. And as I read it, unless I'm reading it wrong, that what's being struck is students in homeschool programs, students participating in a home study program approved by Bessie may be eligible to participate in interscholastic athletic activities at high schools that a member, but then it gave specific criteria on how that homeschool student could be eligible to participate.
I think Ms. Fasell was.
So what we're saying is, are we going to allow?
Originally, the past few years, home study students could ask the principal could they participate in sports. That's what that policy
Yes,
allows.
we do have some that are like cross-country, like at Sumner. We have homeschool students that are participating.
But it was always up to the principal. So I
So-
think now, because we have our virtual program, if they want to participate in our sports program, they need to join our virtual program and attend the sports program in the zone which they live in.
So a homeschooled student that's not in our virtual program cannot participate in athletics?
The opposite.
If you strike this, correct.
Yes.
So they would have to be enrolled in our virtual program, not a homeschool accredited?
A student of the Tangier Parish School System.
Okay, so homeschool students would not be able to participate?
No. We couldn't hold them to the same guidelines about athletes who play with forest grades and tennis and stuff, so.
Okay.
But
They
we,
join our virtual program, they can participate in extracurricular activities.
Because now we offer that. We offer a homeschool, before we didn't.
No, we didn't.
No. I think the confusion is these kids are not even enrolled in our Tangier Parish school system.
You have to be a student.
Exactly.
In this pass, you have to be a student of the Tangier Parish School System.
Right.
Participate in
Homeschool has
extracurricular
nothing to do with Tangier Parish school system at all. And that's, I think maybe that's where the confusion is.
right. But in the past, we have had, through this policy, the ability to allow these homeschool students who are students of tax-paying parents in our parish that wanted to have their children participate in an athletic program. We have allowed that under certain guidelines and criteria, and the vote today, if we were to adopt this recommendation, would terminate that offering. That's what the administration's asking us to do, is to terminate that offering to our citizens who have homeschool children that would allow them to participate in our athletic programs under certain terms and criteria. Ms. Dominguez?
Okay, so if we go back to the homepage of this, your rationale that's listed, it's quoting state statute that it says the Supreme Court declaring parts of the statute unconstitutional in the case of Louisiana High School. Basically, the court declared that schools are not required to allow non-enrolled students and students participating in home study programs to participate in interscholastic activities. According to this section entitled Students in Home Study Programs have been deleted from the policy. So the state law changed in 2013, but we still had the law allowing it. The state law is saying that we don't have to do this.
Says we don't have to.
Yeah.
Doesn't say we
You can
can't.
still have it.
Right, so as I recall, and the way I'm reading that, Ms. Dominguez, is that there was an attempt by the legislature to pass a law that would have allowed us or directed us to restrict the participation of homeschool students. But then the Supreme Court came in and said that this legislature can't do that, that's up, essentially it's up to the district to determine whether they want to allow their homeschool students to participate in their athletic programs. Mr. Tolan.
Last comment. I've had this discussion with previous administrators in different situations, and it's been explained both ways. If our school system's not good enough to teach a child, then why should you want to be in our athletics? I understand that point of view, but also understand there's a lot of people for different reasons, either religious or attendance zones or whatever, that choose the homeschool method that would like to participate in publicly funded athletics that we offer through our school system. And there's guidelines that they have to fall under to be able to legally, like with football, baseball, whatever the sport is, they have to fall under the same guidelines that we do. So I understand both sides, but taxpayer citizens, it's hard to tell them no.
But I think what the point they're making now is before we didn't offer virtual schooling.
Right.
Now we offer virtual schooling. They can be part of Tangier Parish school system, still be able to play athletics, but stay at home and be taught. They don't have to do homeschool. And it would be easier for our administration to be able to do the grading process with that if it's within our school system.
Mr. Jinko, doesn't the private school students are taxpayers in our system too, in our parish?
Yes, sir.
All the private school kids, but they don't participate in athletics in our public schools, can they?
Correct.
Okay, so it's not just that you're a tax-paying citizen, because everybody goes to St. Thomas as a tax-paying citizen that lives in Tangier Parish. So I see if you're a homeschool, you shouldn't be able to participate, and I don't think they've ever participated that I'm aware of, but you might know something more than I know about.
I didn't know, Mr. Toller just said there were some homeschool students that participated in cross-country and some, I did not know that to just now.
We have, and of course, the distinction is that those private schools have their own athletic programs. These homeschoolers don't.
But not all of the private schools have as many athletic programs as we offer. Some of them don't offer the same thing that we have.
They don't. But it doesn't cost us anything significant to allow this to our citizens.
But now that we have virtual, then that would be the requirement that you have to sign up for our virtual.
Yeah, but that's not in the proposal that the administration's bringing forward right now either.
Is that what you're bringing? Are you saying they have to register in virtual? That's what he said.
But it's not in the policy.
Not in the policy.
He's just striking the provisions, but then also, again, a parent may not want to use our curriculum. They may not want to get tied up in, they may have specific curriculum that they like, that is faith-based homeschooling curriculum. There's all sorts of reasons that a parent might not want to use our virtual program.
I think the numbers are so small that we're, arguing over something that's really not an issue. But by doing this, we will definitely end it for anybody.
Mr. Dinko, is the basis for this change to establish a GPA that's compatible with other athletes? Is that it? Are we concerned about the GPA
No, sir.
of the student?
No, sir.
Okay, so homeschool students don't have to maintain a certain grade
Well,
level?
Yes.
Those
To
homeschool
participate?
students that participate in the LHSAA events, the ones specifically that Mr. Toller mentioned, have to have the same GPA as our students do per the LHSAA requirements.
Okay, I just needed to clear that up. I thought I heard that, in between the lines there, so, okay.
I'll make my last argument. Look, I was elected and I represent every citizen that lives in my district, and I think we represent every citizen that lives in the parish, not just the people who choose to send their kids to our schools or the employees of our school system. We represent all of them, and I don't really see a need to restrict those citizens' ability to participate in something that we offer within the school system that they may still want to participate in. So, all right, is there a motion to put on to put before the board?
There's a motion to approve made by Mr. Westmoreland, seconded by Ms. Simmons.
All right, so we have a motion to approve the administration's recommendation made by Mr. Westmoreland, seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Is there any other questions from the board? Is there any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question, ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open.
So if we vote no on this, we're leaving it as is? Everybody can?
Correct.
Okay.
No, in this case, y'all wanted to scratch the whole thing, so at some point, if you want to go back over and review that and bring it back with some more specifics or changes, that's not something that, you can do that later. But it's got a lot of rules to follow. It looks like they have to jump through a lot of hoops to participate. That may be why we don't have a lot of participation.
And principals control it.
Everybody voted?
Voting is closed. Motion fails.
Our next item on the agenda is to consider proposed revisions to policy IDFAR related to interscholastic athletic requirements. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. When we're going through this, we realize it has not been updated in over 23 years, and it is just some updated information related to getting rid of the year 97, 98, adding the current year, and adding some language related to junior high instead of 7th or 8th grade athletics.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
Move to adopt.
Motion is made by Mr. Westmoreland. Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Richards. Mr. Jinko, and maybe this is for Dr. Hurst, I know y'all sent us some information about some meetings that are still in the works and some information that you're gathering related to possibly raising the GPA or academic requirements for participation. There's no recommendations to change those academic requirements within this policy, right?
Yes, sir.
But that does not mean that that discussion is over or that we won't possibly consider that at future meetings after y'all finish the work that you're doing. Is that correct?
Yes, just to give a recap, board, in February, you created a committee to explore the option of raising student athletes GPA to 2.0 from a 1.5. We did some research. We polled the committee and some principals and some coaches. We have that data. I believe we shared it with the board last week. We have a meeting scheduled Thursday with this committee to share that data, to get their final thoughts, and I was going to go over that information with you at the board retreat.
Okay. So adopting these revisions doesn't close the discussion, doesn't necessarily close that discussion for future
No, sir.
meetings.
After I give you the information at the board retreat, then this decision's going to be made to put it on the agenda for adoption or moving forward.
All right. Any other questions from the board?
Just basically clarification. So if you go down where under junior high, under B, it says if they reach their 15th birthday, they can't participate, by August 1st, whatever. Then the next paragraph says when a student enters 7th grade, he or she has 4 consecutive semesters of eligibility. So what happens if they start, in other words, they may not get 4 consecutive
Right.
because they've turned 15.
The age would trump the 4 semesters.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is to consider proposed revisions to IFAB related to textbook and supplementary materials, selections, and adoption. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. This is a policy that we've combined two together and changed the title to textbook and supplemental material selection and adoption. Literally just combining the two other policies together into one.
All right. Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation? Motion made by Mrs. Richards.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Is there any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
All right, next item is to consider proposed revisions to policy IFCD related to school volunteers. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Earlier in the night when we deleted the athletic volunteers policy, what we've done is we've taken the athletic volunteers and the school volunteers and merged those into one policy.
Move to adopt.
Motion is made by Mr. Westmoreland to adopt the administration's recommendation.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Abrams. Are there any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open.
Can I go back and ask a question, please?
Oh,
Mrs. Dominguez?
Well, I was kind of trying to find it. So athletic volunteers, before we had them do a background check because they stayed after school and did all the things with the kids and whatever. So if you have a volunteer that's in the school, those people now going to have to go pay for their own background check and are just the athletic volunteers, but not the volunteer who's there just grading papers for somebody? Correct? Is that
When the volunteer.
only the athletic volunteer or any volunteer at a
Any
school?
volunteer should have to do the background check.
So if you got some parents that's up there serving lunch to the kids for Kids Week or whatever, they're gonna have to get a background check to go serve
So it says,
cupcakes?
the way I read it, it says that every volunteer, school or athletic, shall agree to undergo an extensive criminal background check as required by statute. The athletic volunteers will be responsible for the cost of their background checks. So if you're just volunteering in the school, then there's not a requirement that they pay for their background checks in this policy. But it is a requirement that the athletic volunteers pay for their background checks.
Okay, but that's not right. That doesn't work. I mean, that's not fair. What if you have people do we actually make people get a background check to go volunteer at school? Have we ever done that?
Yes, ma'am.
This day and age, we should be doing it.
But I'm saying, like, if you have a group of PTA people there, every PTA volunteer there is going to get a background check?
Supposed to, yes, ma'am.
They-
Yeah, I can't even imagine that that's been happening everywhere. I mean, maybe sometimes, but if you're there every day volunteering as a person, maybe the PTA president or something, but if you're having open house and you're serving refreshments, you can't expect people to go get a background check.
No, ma'am. Open house with adults, no, ma'am.
I mean, I don't know, it's just pretty confusing. And then why would we make the athletic volunteers who wants to be an athletic volunteer to stay after school and run track or help basketball, and then they still got to go pay for their own gas to get there, they got to stay after hours, and then they got to go pay to get their background check? I mean, maybe that's why we can't get any volunteers? If we're not making the volunteers pay for their background checks, why are we making athletic volunteers pay for their background checks?
Because they love the coach. They do.
I'm just
They-
saying.
But they do.
Well,
it.
what's good as one thing should be good the other way too. I
And
mean,
they
it
also have
shouldn't
to
be,
get certified through the LHSAA.
Correct, yes, sir.
Aren't they usually paid a stipend too?
not really, unless they're really
Athletic?
if they're just a paying volunteer that stays and helps, they don't get any money. But they do go through the training, the basic CLEP training from LHSAA.
I think the biggest question would be what do we consider a volunteer? You
Yeah.
know, you got those parents that are just helping the coach occasionally, holding the chains on a football game Friday night. Are we considering that a volunteer? Or
I can tell you, my husband did stats for Laranja forever. He never did a background check, but I mean, he had background check from work, but not through the school system.
I
And he
guess
did that for almost
question
15
would be,
years.
what is a volunteer? Because it's different when someone gets on a bus and goes to an away game and they're responsible for children
Yeah.
compared to someone who is
Holding the
kind of
chains
all
on a
vague.
Friday night in front of everybody else.
I would consider holding the chains at a game volunteer. You know? What do we consider,
that was in the details.
That's what I'm saying, making a policy that are you going to enforce?
And I mean, half the time they're asking for people to come out the stands to volunteer to run the chains because they have nobody. So what are you gonna do, a background check right then and
I
there?
consider running the chains a little bit different than me working with students after school
Yeah,
when
after
there's
school,
not a
students
crowd
after-
full of
Right,
people.
Yeah.
right.
And all it's gonna take is one incident, and then, we'll be opening the checkbook for quite a lot of money.
So, Mr. Jinko, the way, and I'm assuming this is how it works right now, is the way number 3 reads, it says that each volunteer will agree that they can undergo, well, no, then it says, and shall undergo an extensive criminal background check. So, as required by statute. So, I mean, is there some definition within the statute that says when that background check is triggered for a non-athletic volunteer?
No, I'm not aware of anything that says if I work with students X number of minutes a day or something like that. No, sir. I don't know that answer.
Mr. Jinko, what is the cost of a background check?
I think it's 55-25.
If I'm gonna go hold the chains at a football game, I don't know, I guess you consider that a donation from the volunteer? But we do need people to hold the chain.
I agree, and I wouldn't consider the person holding the chains as a volunteer the same way that I would hold someone that's working with the boys' basketball team after school or the football team after school as a volunteer.
Right. So there is a difference between a close-up and personal volunteer and then those who basically have no contact with the students at all.
Yes, sir.
Question.
Did it pass, Mr. Jenkins?
We haven't.
No,
voted-
What would we have to
we
pay?
suspended the call, I'm sorry.
What would we have to pay someone for that? Short
wait
period
for
of time
two
if they
people.
run those chains up and down the field?
What would we have to pay someone?
What do you think we would have to pay someone to do that?
Maybe 3 hours, whatever.
They get
Maybe-
referee pay, probably?
About
Let them
40,
get in the game free, maybe.
about $60? About $60?
I've never gotten one bid.
I don't know, I just think
We're not
number
talking
three
about
is,
change.
you know, if you're gonna if you're gonna charge the athletic volunteers for theirs and they're gonna do it, I mean, it's just so blatant that you're charging the athletic volunteers, but you're not charging the other volunteers. I mean,
I think it needs to be worded a little bit differently. I think it needs to be worded if they're in direct contact
Yeah.
with the athletes, that's considered a volunteer. If a chain person running the chains, a person that's doing, stats, that's not considered a volunteer. That's just a parent just giving their time.
Volunteering.
Volunteering their time, but they're not actually in contact with our students. They're not every day after school with our students. I think it just needs to be worded a little bit differently.
So, let me just
I
clean
think maybe we
something
should-
up.
we
Just
just
hold
need to
on.
clean this up a little bit.
Yeah,
Let me,
table that or
Ms.
something.
Jenkins,
So-
please suspend the call of the question.
Okay, I'm removing the votes.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right. So the call of the question has been suspended. Does a member of the board have a motion to make at this time?
Do we need a table?
Well,
Ms. Dominguez, would
the
you
thing
like
is-
to move,
oh, but I'm just,
would you like to move that the last sentence of section 3 be struck?
I'm just thinking, the reason we had two policies, athletic volunteers and volunteers, is because it was basic clarified. So we voted to remove athletic volunteers policy and merge it in, but we truly didn't merge it all in. We only merged a couple, 2 or 3 things. So I'm not sure
Well, what your
if,
complaint was that we were requiring athletic volunteers to be responsible for the cost of the background check, but that we were silent as to whether the other volunteers also had to be responsible for the background check.
well, in the
What I'm-
full athletic policy, it said that I'm going back and finding it, it said that the respective school will be responsible for the cost of the background checks.
All right, so would you like to move at this time to strike that last sentence of section 3 and leave the policy silent as to who and under what circumstances the cost of the background check will be dealt with?
Or you could go back and do it like it was in the original athletic volunteers thing and say the respective school will be responsible for the cost of the background check.
let me pull that.
And also, Mr. Jenkins, we might put that, what Ms. Robin was talking about, the definition, maybe a volunteer is defined as, maybe give us some of that stuff, examples or something, because obviously,
Would a member of the board like to make a motion to table
I think just remove.
to the next
I'd like
policy
to make a
committee?
motion that we table this until it's worded a little differently.
Second.
All right, so I have a motion by Mrs. Richards, seconded by Mrs. Bailey Simmons.
Yeah.
To table.
To table the proposed
Bring it back.
revisions. The motion to table is not debatable. I'll call the question on the motion to table.
Just bring it back some other day.
This is a,
Online
the
voting is open.
And Ms. Jenkins, this is a motion to table to
Table.
the next policy committee meeting.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And Mr. Snodderback can figure out who's gonna pay for the background.
Are you,
Cindy, what we have here is a motion to,
Yeah, until
Table.
until I get this new motion voted for, it will not change.
okay.
all right, so we can vote on what you've sent us already?
Yes,
And you'll clarify
Motion to-
that it's a motion to table to the next,
yes, that's what.
Committee
Do
meeting.
y'all see that motion on your?
Yes.
Motion to
Already
table?
voted, yeah.
No,
Vote
I
on
see a
that.
motion.
don't see it,
Consider
but I'll vote
approval
yes.
of the
You
revision
don't?
to policy IF.
I voted.
I'd already voted, so I
I
don't
voted.
right now, but, yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Moore, do you vote yes to table it?
Yeah, I vote to table it.
Okay. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
all right, pause, we're going to go back now to agenda item, I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Schnatterbach, just a second. We're going to go back to agenda item 2,
See?
C, and request a motion from someone on the board to reconsider our prior action as to agenda item 2C.
I'll make that motion.
The motion is made to reconsider agenda item 2C motion is made by Mrs. Dominguez,
I'll second it.
seconded by Mr. Bush. Ask members to vote your machines on the motion to reconsider.
Voting is open.
Mr. Moore, will you vote?
That was easy.
Voting is closed. Motion passes with Mr. Moore voting no.
All right, and now that we have agreed to reconsider our prior action as to item 2C, I will now receive a motion from the board to table to our next policy committee meeting, the administration's recommendation to delete IFCDA from our policy manual.
Motion to table till next
Motion.
meeting.
Motion is made by Mr. Westmoreland to table the administration's recommendation to delete policy IFCDA,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Toller. Motion to table is non-debatable, but this will keep this policy in place
Exactly.
until the board votes on a new policy.
Good deal.
Is, again, motion to table is non-debatable. Call the question. Mrs. Jenkins, please vote your machine.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Jenkins, was there anything else? Okay. Mr. Schnatterbach. All right. Now move on to the next item on our agenda, which
Okay.
is item 3K, which is to consider proposed revisions to policy IHG related to credit recovery. Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, sir. We're just adding a statement that students may earn a maximum of 7 credit recovery units that may be applied towards diploma graduation requirements and no more than 2 Carnegie units of credits annually. Any students earning more than the above requirement must be reported to the Louisiana Department of Education with the rationale. And this comes from some NCAA action related to students that are attempting to move to the next level.
All right. Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
I'll make the motion to adopt.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons, Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Dominguez. Any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimous with Mr. Toller not being present.
Next item on the agenda is agenda item 3L, which is to consider proposed revisions to policy KA related to school community relations goals. Mr. Jinko.
Yes, sir. Earlier in the evening, we deleted public community relations and combining it with the school community relations goal into this policy. So that's what you have before you.
Is there a motion to adopt the administration's recommendation?
So move.
Motion is made by Mr. Toller, seconded by Mr. Westmoreland. Any questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Next item on the agenda is agenda item 3M, related to consider proposed revisions to policy KIC related to distribution, posting of promotional materials. Mr. Jinko.
Thank you, sir. Just added some information that nonprofit organizations can disseminate information into the teachers' mailboxes with permission from the principal or their designee.
Make a motion to accept.
Motion is made by Mrs. Dominguez. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Richards. Any questions from the board?
What was, where did it have to go before this?
It usually went to the superintendent and he or she approved it, and then it went to the schools.
Okay.
Now we're just allowing the schools to make those decisions.
Okay, I'm just going to ask this question because you know it's my job. Penny power. So individual schools are going to be able to say if they want or not to participate? It won't have to go through the superintendent?
That's different than disseminating information. Let's say I'm Biddy basketball tryouts are this day.
Gotcha.
You know, that is more of a fundraiser, so that would go through the superintendent for permission there.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak for Ms. Staley.
Any other questions from the board? Any public input?
No, sir.
Nope. Hearing no public input, we'll call the question. Ask members to vote your machines.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Dr. Hurst, is it your intention to pull either agenda item N or O?
That depends.
All right. Well, so now we get to the portion of our agenda where we get to beat up on Dr. Hurst. Agenda item 3N, which is to consider proposed revisions to policy JCDAE related to the student use of electronic devices. Dr. Hurst.
Yes, board, that's just some changing in the wording, going from telephone to cellular or any other similar devices, and changing expulsion to due process hearing.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Question.
Motion is made by Mr. Westmoreland, seconded by Mr. Bush. Are you calling the question?
No, I have a question.
Okay.
Good point.
Ms. Dominguez.
Okay, I see where you've added up to, for the third offense, excuse me, let me go back. Okay, so third and subsequent offenses, you've added up to $25, and I see that in the second offense, it says up to $15, so I can see that. But I'm not sure why I'm following you would say may recommend or possibly recommend a due process hearing. I don't agree with expulsion over cell phones these days because naturally everybody has a cell phone and that's how we live and that's the new world. But I don't think it should leave it to like we may have a hearing if you didn't follow the rules 3 times. It should be a mandatory hearing, discipline something, right?
Yes, we had this discussion. It depends on the situation. A lot of times, a simple violation of a cell phone policy at the school would escalate to something larger like disrespect, cursing administration out. So it'll be up to the principal to determine on the circumstances that they may recommend a request or a recommendation for a due process hearing. So some kids, when they're caught, they hand it over. There's no issue with it. Some kids, when they're caught, it escalates to something larger. So they give the administration the authority to say, hey, is this escalated to something it shouldn't have to? Because of the nature of the incident, we're going to recommend a meeting with student services.
But Dr. Hurst, this is a specific instance. It says, should a student refuse to follow a directive and relinquish the electronic device when requested? I mean, that's the specific instance. You have been directed to turn over the device as our policy requires, and you are refusing to.
Yes, and our principals have that problem a lot when their students are found with one. So a lot of times they call on student service, so that gives them the authority to request a hearing with students, due process hearing with student service, because students, in some cases, will put them in their pants and refuse to give them to administration. This cause a big commotion about something simple.
But the way this is, what Mr. Dominguez, is it also gives the principal the option, I guess, to just ignore that defiance and move on to the next task of the day.
Yeah, well, that shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be open-ended. If you don't give me your phone when I tell you to give me your phone, well, okay, go back to class and we'll think about it next week. We might have a hearing because you didn't give me your phone. That's how I'm reading it. It should be a cut and dry. If they don't apply the rule or whatever, then there should be some kind of a, naturally we don't want to expel kids, but that's a defiant problem.
So you say changing the word may to shall?
I mean, wouldn't you think you would have to have something to, what if they don't?
It says shall have a due process hearing or a meeting with student services. So I mean, it's not saying that we're triggering a due process hearing. It's saying that we're triggering a due process hearing or we're going to refer it to student services. But it's not offering the third option of, well, I just don't feel like dealing with this today.
No, it's not offering that.
Well, but the way it's worded now, that it does offer that.
It does offer that.
So if we say shall be recommended to a due process hearing or a meeting with student services, it requires one of those things to happen. So does that fit within our current model?
Yes, because student services come in and assess the situation.
All right, so Ms. Dominguez, are you making a motion at this time to amend the
I have a question first, Mr. Dahl. What happens? How do they get the phone? Because this sentence says they refused. Okay, let's talk about that a second. What happens if they just say no and they just keep walking? I mean, you can.
It goes to the next step of, you have some cases where students refuse to give it up.
So
walk off campus. It just depends on the situation. So when it gets to that extreme, then that's when student services gets involved.
But they get to keep the phone that day, the whole day during the day?
Well,
They get to stay at school and walk around and say, I wouldn't listen?
no, normally the parent is called or come get the student. So there are steps that are
Okay,
taken
I got
to
you.
make sure the
So
student.
someone calls a parent and say, you need to come get it. Okay.
We try to tell our administrators to not escalate the situation if that makes sense. We're not going to wrestle a kid down.
Change
for a
your
cell
word.
phone.
Okay,
But we know how to handle it on the back end.
I got you.
So Ms. Dominguez is making the motion to amend, changing the word may to shall in the last sentence of the policy.
Mr. Biggs, you make some good motions.
Hold on,
Tonight you weren't on good.
I got a motion by Mrs. Dominguez. Is there a second? And then I'll
Second.
take questions.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Toller. Recognize Mr. Moore for a question.
Mr. Bush, who's authorized to ask a student for their cell phone?
Any school employee who sees a student violate a rule can address that student, but the administration will be the one that'll come in and ensure that that policy is followed if a student is not
I
complying.
mean, cafeteria worker, janitor?
They're a school employee, they're required to enforce the rules.
I see. All right. And is there, okay, I guess I would need to go back and look at what specifies a justification to ask a student for their phone. If they see it, they can, and I'm not asking you to go through all of that right now. I just said I just need to go back and take a look at it.
If you have a student just moving the phone from one pocket to the next one, you know, our administrators normally don't address that, but if a student is actively using the phone and they determine that to be the case, then they will address that situation.
Okay.
Well, and we
All
also
right.
have permissible use of the electronic devices under certain circumstances.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion to amend by Mrs. Dominguez, seconded by Mr. Toller. Are there any other questions on the proposed amendment? Is there any objection to the proposed amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is agreed to. Are there any questions now on, any other questions on the proposed policy as amended? Any public input? Hearing none, we'll call the question on the proposed policy as amended. Ask members to vote your seat.
Voting is open. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Finally, agenda item 3O, which is to consider some proposed revisions to policy JDD related to suspension. Dr. Hurst.
Yes, a lot of the wording has been changed to reflect our work with the changes in discipline as far as our CCEI documents. Some of the notable changes, on page 2, where you see the red is striked out, we took out where a student who is suspended for a fourth time may be expelled. We have other provisions for students who, we hope not to get there, but we have the SAT process and other processes that we use instead of the 3-4 strike rules, you're out for students. We also added in the green section, under that section, language to bus damage that was done by students to a bus, process for restitution, which has to be approved by the superintendent, and the appeal for parents for students who are recommended for expulsion and is reduced to a suspension. They do have the right to appeal to the board to have that changed. And some of those recommendations came from court orders as well.
All right, is there a motion to adopt the administration's
I
recommendation?
make the motion to adopt.
Motion is made by Mrs. Bailey Simmons. Is there a second?
Second.
Westmoreland. Seconded by Mr. Westmoreland. Questions from the board?
No, okay.
Any-
Rose said I had a question already, it was repaired, fixed already.
I think Mr. Hurst made a strategic decision to put this one last. He knew we would be tired at this point. Yeah. Any other questions from the board? Any public input? Hearing none, call the question, ask members to vote your machine.
Voting is open.
Yes.
Mr. Bush. Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Recognize Mr. Richards for a comment.
And Dr. Mitchell, I have a comment. I know that it's probably, out of our hands or out of you all's hands, but one of the things that I'm just so concerned about is that, again, Kentwood has been placed in 2A, And we are clearly a 1A school, and I just think that it's continuously putting our children in harm's way. Because, I mean, we gotta play, those kids have to play both sides constantly, and you playing these big schools. We win, and we happy, and our coaches want us to win and want us to dominate 2A, but how much are we putting our children in harm's way there? My question.
No other business come before the committee. This meeting is adjourned.
I'm attorney Pat Dunn. Auto accidents are a part of life. I hope you never need an attorney, but if you do, the team at the Mack Law Firm is here to help. Don't be intimidated by large insurance companies who just want to make your problem go away. We are here to represent your rights and interests. Contact me today at tangilawteam.com and let's get to work.